The film opens by introducing a mother and daughter. The mother's name is Yoshie, and the daughter's name is Mi. One day, while all the children in the neighborhood are playing with Mi, Yoshie suddenly remembers an errand she needs to run. After thoroughly checking the house, she heads out to attend to it. However, when she returns home after completing the task, she finds no children inside, not even Mi. She assumes that Mi is likely still playing with her friends or has gone over to their house. But as a considerable amount of time passes, she begins to investigate. The children inform her that Mi hasn't been with them for quite a while. Upon hearing this, she becomes deeply panicked. After searching everywhere for Mi, she calls her husband to inform him that Mi is missing. By that time, the police have also arrived at her home. The police, along with everyone else in the neighborhood, spend the entire day trying to find Mi. Yet, Mi is nowhere to be found. Exhausted and defeated, everyone returns home. That night, as Yoshie goes to put the dirty laundry into the washing machine, she lets out a piercing scream. Her daughter, Mi, was inside the machine. She had, in fact, died from suffocation. This was a devastating shock for Yoshie. A year passes and we see that Yoshie has still not been able to recover from that trauma. This is because she knew that the lock on her washing machine was broken. Had she replaced it just a few days earlier, that tragedy might never have occurred. Despite undergoing various forms of therapy, she remains unable to move forward with her life. One day, Yoshie's mother brings her a flyer. It describes a temple where, as part of a specific ritual, personal belongings of the deceased are brought and burned, a process believed to help the bereaved find closure and overcome their grief. Yoshie's mother wanted Yoshie to visit the temple, but suddenly the flyer slipped from Yoshie's grasp and, carried by a strong gust of wind, began to drift away. Yoshie ran to catch it, and the flyer eventually fluttered down and stuck to a box of dolls located quite a distance away. Yoshie gazed at the doll resting inside that strange, old box. For some inexplicable reason, she felt so drawn to it that it began to feel just like her own daughter to her. She bought the doll and brought it home. That very evening, when Yoshie's husband returned home, he noticed that Yoshie was remarkably happy. He was delighted to see this transformation in her demeanor. Yoshie had prepared a delicious meal that day. As he happily took his seat at the dining table, he was stunned to see a doll sitting in his daughter's chair. However, upon seeing the doll, he remained silent, for he realized that it was precisely this doll that had restored Yoshie's spirits. In this manner, days turned into weeks, and Yoshie nurtured the doll as if it were her own flesh and blood daughter. She bought clothes for it, bathed it, washed it, and kept it meticulously clean. The strangest phenomenon of all was the observation that the doll's hair and fingernails continued to grow incessantly. Yoshie herself would even trim them. Yet, she remained oblivious to the fact that this was merely a doll. How, after all, could a doll's hair or nails possibly grow? Even after so much time had passed, whenever Hiko laid eyes on the doll, he would tremble with fear. One day, he even took Yoshie to see a doctor and explained the entire situation regarding the doll. The doctor called Hiko aside for a private consultation and advised him not to take the doll away from Yoshie. The doctor explained that for Yoshie, the doll was serving a therapeutic purpose, much like a beloved pet. Yoshie, too, was able to move forward with her life thanks to that doll. Hiko understood this, and gradually, their lives began to get back on track. During this time, they received some joyful news. A little guest would soon be arriving in their home. It felt as though a new life had knocked on Yoshie's door. She had begun to truly live again. Some time passed, and another daughter was born into their family, making their family complete. They gave this daughter a name similar to the previous one, namely Mai. After Mai's birth, it seemed as though Yoshie had completely forgotten about the doll. She didn't throw the doll away, but she began to set it aside. One day, while watching the baby monitor, Yoshie realized she had left the doll right next to Mai. Yoshie and her mother immediately rushed to Mai's side and found her crying, with the doll's hair wrapped tightly around her neck. They were deeply alarmed, and Yoshie's mother angrily threw the doll aside. She recounted the entire incident to her husband, Hiko, who decided to lock the doll away again. When he went into his daughter's room to do so, the first thing he noticed was the doll's box, upon which some strange incantations were inscribed. The two of them locked the doll away once more. Some time passed. Everything was back to normal. Mai had grown up by now and had started going to school. One day, when she returned home from school, she found some marbles while she was playing. Suddenly, one of the marbles rolled toward the wardrobe and disappeared inside. When she opened the cupboard to look for her marble, her eyes fell upon the box containing the doll. She opened it up and took it out. When she showed the doll to Yoshie, Yoshie was slightly surprised, yet she didn't show any particular reaction. After all, it was just a doll. However, Yoshie notices something strange. The doll's hair has grown remarkably long, and she distinctly remembers having cut it herself. That very night, when she mentions to her husband that the doll's hair and fingernails have grown, he pays little attention, remarking, "Who knows whether you actually cut them or not?" Yoshie brushes these comments aside, and life returns to normal. One day, we see Mai talking to the doll, and we even hear the doll's voice in response, confirming beyond doubt that it is, in fact, a living doll. Similarly, one night, Mai becomes frightened of the doll and comes to sleep in Yoshie's bed. She tells her mother that she doesn't know why, but she feels terrified of the doll. Yoshie, however, still does not take her daughter's words seriously. The following day, one of Mai's friends and the friend's mother come to visit Yoshie's home. The two children go into the room and begin playing with the doll. Suddenly, the visiting girl bursts into loud, hysterical tears. When the two women rush into the room to investigate, they discover bite marks on the visiting girl's arm. Mai and her friend insist that the doll was the one that bit her. However, both women refuse to believe this explanation. Yoshie is convinced that Mai must be the culprit, lying out of fear. She apologizes to the other child's mother, and the visitors depart. Later that night, while attending to her chores, Yoshie enters Mai's room and finds Mai wearing a paper bag over her head. Ignoring this oddity for the moment, she notices the chaotic state of Mai's clothes and belongings. As she begins to tidy up the room, she is overcome with rage upon discovering that Mai has defaced every single photograph of her eldest daughter. She had ruined several family photographs, and this made Yoshie furious. Intending to scold Mai, she pulled the paper bag off Mai's head, only to discover that a doll was sitting there instead. Just then, she saw Mai approaching from behind her. This was the second such incident that day. For the time being, Yoshie chose to overlook it. The following day, Yoshie received a phone call from the school. Mai's art teacher had summoned Yoshie immediately because Mai had created a drawing depicting a mother and daughter hanging from a noose. It was a deeply disturbing image. How could a child's thoughts be so unsettling? This realization troubled Yoshie deeply as well. Mai had also produced another drawing, in which a girl was walking on water. This time, Yoshie realized that all of this was happening because of that doll. Yet, she still refused to speak to anyone about it and went to bed. That night, Mai came to her again frightened. As Yoshie began to gently comfort her, she realized that it was not Mai. When she looked down into her lap, she saw the doll. She screamed aloud, waking up her Heiko as well. Her husband comforted her and helped her get back to sleep, but he did not listen to what she had to say. The next day, in a fit of rage, Yoshie stuffed the doll into a bag and threw it into the trash. Afterward, she returned home to prepare a meal. Suddenly, she heard the sound of the front door opening. When she went to investigate, she found the doll sitting right at the doorway, with a paper bag pulled over its head. Absolutely livid, Yoshie began violently striking the doll's head with the rolling pin she held in her hand. She had nearly crushed it completely, but then, in the very next instant, she saw the doll sitting on Mai's bed. The person she had been beating was none other than her own daughter Mai. Upon seeing this, she let out a piercing scream and snapped back to reality. It had all been just a nightmare. Perhaps the doll itself was the one projecting these visions to her. Just as she regained her senses, the doorbell rang. This time, when Yoshie went to check, the doll was indeed sitting right outside the door. Municipal workers had returned it, accompanied by a note. The note stated that the disposal of such large items of refuse was prohibited. Yoshie flew into a rage once again. She took the doll downstairs and handed it over to the garbage collectors. They then loaded the doll into their municipal truck. Feeling a sense of relief, Yoshie returned to her home. She was going about her daily chores when suddenly, she heard a commotion coming from outside. When she went out to see what the trouble was, she was utterly devastated. The man to whom she had handed the doll had been crushed to death inside his own garbage truck. A horrific end, too gruesome for anyone to even bear looking at. Yoshie was completely shattered, for she now realized that all of this was the doll's doing. Just then, at the scene of the murder, she notices that her daughter is holding that very doll. She is furious with Yoshie, as Yoshie had previously given the doll away to a garbage collector. Yoshie too is baffled as to who could have told her daughter Mai about these things. At this moment, we observe once again that the doll's hair has grown longer. Yoshie says nothing to her daughter, and they return home with the doll. However, Yoshie has now begun to keep a constant watch over her daughter and the doll. She even confides in her husband about her fears. But when he refuses to believe her, Yoshie shows him the baby monitor, on which her daughter could be seen talking to the doll. Believe it or not, Yoshie insists, this doll is definitely hiding something. Her husband, however, dismisses her concerns, telling her that she is simply stressed and should ignore such thoughts. Following this, Yoshie goes back to bed. The next day, while talking to her daughter, the kitchen door suddenly slams shut behind her. She does not panic. She assumes the door must have closed on its own. Through the glass pane of the door, she catches a glimpse of her daughter standing in the dim light of the kitchen. But then, in the very next instant, she senses that something has darted past her from behind. She rushes to Mai's room and finds Mai hiding beneath her blanket. When she pulls back the blanket to check on her, Mai immediately scrambles under the bed. When Yoshie looks beneath the bed, she finds no one there. It is then that she realizes an invisible entity, concealing itself beneath the blanket, is making its escape. Yoshie watches it go. It is not the doll, nor is it her daughter. It was an evil spirit. Yoshie is overcome with even greater terror as she is suddenly reminded of the tragic moment when her first daughter had died, trapped inside the washing machine. She quickly rushes into the laundry room and discovers that her daughter was actually hiding inside the washing machine. As soon as she opens it, a terrifying-looking girl attacks her. She attempts to kill Yoshie, but Yoshie pushes her, knocking her to the ground. It turned out that it was his own daughter, Mai, who had been severely injured. They immediately rush her to the hospital. During the examination, numerous other injuries are discovered on Mai's body, including marks on her waist that suggest she had been tortured or scratched with fingernails. Even the father now begins to grow suspicious of the doll. However, by this time, Yoshie is completely shattered. She tells her husband to go and perform a ritual on the doll, to banish it from their lives forever. The husband returns home and searches the box for incantations. He discovers the name Yasumoto inscribed on it. Upon further investigation, he learns that Yasumoto was a renowned doll maker. He finds images of several other dolls created by Yasumoto that bear an uncanny resemblance to their own doll. Meanwhile, the temple they had contacted, to whom they had described the doll and sent a photograph of its box, reaches out to them immediately and strongly advises them to exercise extreme caution. They said, "The doll you possess is no ordinary doll. It is a living doll. Before it can do anything harmful to you, we will come and take it away." The husband, who had never had any prior knowledge of such things, was left completely bewildered upon hearing these words. He searched on YouTube for information regarding living dolls and stumbled upon a story about a group of people who were traveling to Yasumoto's village to uncover the truth behind these living dolls. The story about the living dolls that those children had heard went like this. One day, Yasumoto's daughter suddenly vanished and was never found again. From that day forward, his wife became convinced that her daughter's soul had taken up residence inside a doll crafted by Yasumoto, and she began to raise and nurture that doll as if it were her own daughter. One day, when Yasumoto's wife passed away, Yasumoto buried the doll alongside her. However, sometime later, the doll was spotted wandering aimlessly through the forest. Subsequently, people began to fabricate various tales. One such story claimed that the doll had escaped from its grave and had set out to find its master's other daughter, Yasumoto's second daughter, Rei, whom no one had ever been able to locate. The father did not believe this story in the slightest. Consequently, he investigated the reports regarding Rei's disappearance and discovered that the story was, in fact, true. Meanwhile, it came to light that Mi, the daughter, was no longer being kept at their own home. Instead, she had been placed in the care of Yoshie's mother. Yet, even there, the doll had begun to wreak havoc openly and without fear. It was openly tormenting Yoshie's mother and had even physically attacked her on several occasions. Yoshie's mother immediately called Yoshie's husband. "Your daughter is trying to take my life." The husband immediately set off for their home. However, when Yoshie's mother returned to the room, she discovered that Mi was not there. She went outside to search for her and found her sitting on a bridge. She quickly pulled her down from the bridge and began leading her home. When suddenly she was struck with sheer horror. She realized that the real Mi was actually with her father, and the figure she had been holding was merely the doll. Until that moment, Yoshie's mother had mistaken the doll for the real Mi. She came to the chilling realization that everything she had experienced, the bites on her hands and feet included, was either a delusion of her own mind or a sinister ploy orchestrated by the doll. CCTV footage subsequently revealed that the doll was indeed behind all these bizarre occurrences, having orchestrated the entire charade while sitting on the bridge. The father still could not bring himself to believe that a mere doll was capable of such malicious acts. Consequently, he compared the bite marks on his wrist and watched to his daughter's teeth, but the marks did not match. He began to sense that something was terribly amiss. The following day, the temple caretaker arrived and retrieved the box containing the doll. They wrapped the doll in a white cloth and commenced the ritualistic prayers. Afterward, the doll was incinerated alongside several other dolls. However, it is at this juncture that the priest's true nature is revealed. He had not in fact burned the real doll, for it was an antique of great value that could fetch a substantial sum of money. He had deliberately burned a fake doll to deceive Yoshie and Hiko, thereby enabling himself to sell the genuine article. As the priest was making his way toward the train station with the doll in tow, strands of hair suddenly began to emerge from his mouth. While attempting to dislodge the hair, his foot slipped, and he fell onto the vehicle's accelerator pedal, resulting in his instantaneous death at the scene. Everyone lifts the priest up and rushes him to the emergency hospital. We discover that Hiko also works at this very hospital. It is here that they all uncover the truth about the priest. Terrified, the surviving priest returns the doll to Hiko, revealing to him that the doll is a curse. At that exact moment, nurses arrives on the scene. As she picks up the doll, a tooth breaks off from its mouth and falls into her hands. The nurse is left stunned by this sight. How could such a thing be possible? How could a tooth possibly break off from a doll's mouth? They then perform an MRI scan on the doll and discover that, hidden inside, lies the complete skeleton of a young girl, including a tooth. Everyone is left aghast at this discovery. They immediately notify the police, who take the doll away for investigation. However, knowing the doll's true capabilities, the priest and the grandfather decide to follow the police car to ensure the doll cannot harm anyone else. Suddenly, while driving, the police officer discovers a photograph lying near the doll. When he looks at it, he sees the doll's terrifying face staring back at him. He is so startled that his attention wavers. Just then, a young girl suddenly appears in the middle of the road. He attempts to slam on the brakes but fails, and the girl is struck by the vehicle and crushed beneath its tires. The police officer is left in a state of shock and deep distress by this entire tragic incident. We observe that, by this time, another man has joined Yoshie. After listening to the doll's entire backstory, he places it back inside its original box and takes it away with him. This man's objective is to neutralize the doll's malevolent powers. He takes them to the home of a retired police officer named Harun, who is now confined to a wheelchair. There, he begins to recount the true history of the doll. He recounts that one day, Yasumoto came to see him at the police station. Yasumoto was the very man who used to craft the finest dolls in Japan, dolls that commanded extremely high prices in those days. He was a renowned figure, yet, on the day he came to me, he revealed a truly horrific truth regarding one of his dolls. This story is inextricably linked to the birth of a daughter within Yasumoto's family. Yasumoto's wife was far from pleased with the arrival of this daughter. She had desperately wanted a son. However, what was done could not be undone. As time passed, the girl grew older, yet they had no other children. Consumed by this mixture of rage and sorrow, Yasumoto's wife attempted to hang her daughter, and then herself. But because the rope was weak, Yasumoto's wife survived the ordeal, but her daughter did not. When Yasumoto discovered what had happened, he was utterly devastated. He loved his wife deeply. To save her from the consequences of her actions, he secretly disposed of his daughter's body by dissolving it in boiling water. Once the remains had completely dissolved, he fashioned a complete doll using her bones. This was that very doll. His wife, overcome with shame and remorse for what she had done, a few days later she too passed away, succumbing to her grief. Her dying wish was to be buried inside the very vessel in which her daughter had been boiled. The doll was buried alongside her. Everything was carried out exactly as she had requested. The police officer concludes his account by explaining that, at that time, Yasumoto had come to him to confess all this crime. We filed a report against him. To effect an arrest, we required concrete evidence. Yasumoto led us to the site where his wife and daughter had been buried. Yet, when we exhumed the grave, we found only Yasumoto's wife. Someone had stolen the doll. The man who had brought Yoshie and husband to this place revealed that he possessed a method to neutralize the doll's malevolence, a way to destroy its demonic form. He commenced a ritual, explaining that once it was concluded, they would have to locate the doll's true burial site and bury the doll there. Prior to the ritual, they successfully pinpointed the exact location of the grave. Before they could even begin the ceremony, the doll unleashed a terrifying storm upon them, laying waste to everything in its path. It was during this chaotic onslaught that they witnessed the doll's horrific, true form. Consequently, the priest was left severely injured. To appease the doll, the priest sprinkled holy water upon her and completed his ritual. Now that the priest was wounded and unable to proceed further, he entrusted the next task to Yoshie and her husband, placing the doll into the excavated grave. They arrived at the designated spot, lifted the lid of the grave, and Yoshie gently placed the doll inside. In that very moment, a photograph of their eldest daughter slipped from their grasp and fell into the grave. Just as Yoshie reaches out to pick up the photograph, the doll suddenly comes to life, grabs her, and drags her inside, forcing husband to intervene to save her wife. In that moment, they both experience a sensation eerily similar to having their own daughter trapped inside a washing machine. Husband smashes the machine open and pulls his daughter out. However, it is revealed that while husband had indeed pulled his wife out, her hair remained entangled inside the grave. Oshi quickly cuts her hair to free herself. Finally, they escape this nightmare and return home. Their lives have now largely returned to normal. Some time passes, and we see that the priest who had performed ritual has come to visit Yoshie and Heiko. Here, Yoshie's mother shows the priest footage from a baby monitor, which clearly captures the moment when Mii was talking to the doll. In the footage, she is heard telling the Mii, "I don't want to go home because my mother beats me constantly. I want to stay right here with you because Yoshie has given me a mother's love, and that is the only kind of maternal love I want." This causes Yoshie's mother to feel a sense of unease. She senses that something is amiss, that the ritual was never truly completed. Here comes a major twist. Yoshie and Heiko's real daughter was still with Yoshie's mother. Since returning from the island, husband Heiko and Yoshie had never gone to pick her up. They had completely severed all contact with Yoshie's mother. That is why Yoshie's mother had contacted the priest and sent him to them. Meanwhile, we see Yoshie and Heiko living a seemingly normal life, keeping a little girl, whom they believe to be their daughter. However, they remain blissfully unaware that the child they are raising is not their real daughter at all. She was, in reality, that very wicked doll. At that time, the doll had taken control of the minds of both Heiko and Yoshie. That is why she had come along with them. The doll had fulfilled her promise. She had been yearning for her mother's love, and now, by living with Yoshie, she is finally receiving it, while Yoshie's own daughter continues to yearn for her mother's affection. Thus, this horror film comes to an end here, concluding with a tragic finale.